Chippendales have been a mainstay on the Las Vegas Strip for decades now. But ahead tonight, 2020 uncovers the dark history of greed and murder-for-hire plots behind the rise of the famous exotic dance group. Good morning, Las Vegas anchor Kalina Estrino sits down with ABC's Amy Robach for a special sneak peek.
So we want to just start off with this. So Chippendales, as we know, global sensation essentially back in the 80s and 90s. So how did this go from that to a murder-for-hire plot?
It really is a remarkable thing. Anyone who was around in the 80s and 90s, of course, is familiar with the Chippendales, the male exotic show that had women smiling and giggling in the audience. It seemed like such a joyful thing. It was for a solid 15 years. Really, they were a global sensation, but very few people knew what was actually happening backstage, behind the curtain. The man who was behind it all, Steve Banerjee, was obsessed with wealth, obsessed with having it all, literally, and he was willing to try and take out anyone who got in his way, literally, and he did just that to the man he brought in as a creative genius to help with the Chippendales, a man who was his partner. And once he had disagreements with him, once he felt like he had to share the spotlight and share some of the finances, he had Nick DeNoia murdered and killed. And Nick's death was a mystery for several years. The New York City Police Department could not solve that crime. An FBI agent got involved. We actually talked to the FBI agent who put the pieces of the puzzle together, and all pointed towards Steve Banerjee. And Nick was not his only victim. If you got in his way, if you were a male exotic dancer and you wanted to leave the Chippendales, you might have a target on your head. And so we talked to one of the dancers who was targeted by Steve and luckily was still alive and managed to escape any sort of murder plot in order to speak with us.
You just mentioned the hit list, so to speak. So kind of curious about that hit list, who was on the Chippendales, who led for other dance groups. Can you explain a little bit more of that? And as you know, we do have Chippendales here in Las Vegas. So is there any way there's a possible Vegas connection here?
Well, you know, I think that they are Las Vegas, correct, right? I mean, that's such a big part of the fabric of Las Vegas and that type of show. And certainly the Chippendales bring so much joy to so many people, and still do in Vegas there. But the men who were there in the 80s and 90s talk about the darkness and the fear that they lived with. If you crossed Steve Banerjee, he truly was the mastermind of all that went wrong behind the scenes. And certainly, yes, we talked to people who were caught in the crosshairs, people who survived murder-for-hire plots, some of the producers, some of the dancers. It really is hard to imagine that someone would be willing to kill to just basically take everything for themselves and to take out anyone who they disagreed with creatively.
ABC's Amy Robach, thank you so much for joining us ahead of tonight's documentary on 2020. Looking forward to seeing this for sure.
And here's a look